Ready to make a real impact every day? Join the Active Day Home Care team and help clients maintain their independence in the comfort of their own homes. Make a difference in someone's life as you provide essential daily assistance and protect their health and happiness. Earn up to $20 an hour and enjoy additional perks like optional daily pay, 401k, paid time off, ongoing educational training, and more. Join a team that values care, compassion, and your professional growth. Visit activeday.com to apply.
It's showtime.
People pay good money to see this movie. When they go out to a theater, they want cold sodas, hot popcorn, and no monsters in the projection booth.
Everyone pretend podcasting isn't boring.
Turn it off.
Turn it off.
Por la deliciosa noche que nos ha ofrecido nuestra amiga Silvia, con su estupenda creación de la novia virgen de la Bermuda.
Me van a perdonar si altero un poco el orden natural del menú. Vamos a comenzar con un guiso maltés, que según costumbre en la isla se sirve como hors d'oeuvre. Parece que abre el apetito. Hígado, miel, almendras y con una salsa muy especiada. Vuelva a llevarlo al jardín.
La señora me tranquiliza con esa medida, porque hay asuntos graves que requieren la inmediata atención de la señora.
¿Ocurre algo?
Suceden cosas muy extrañas.
Señores, peor que el pánico no hay nada. Una situación como esta no puede durar indefinidamente. No estamos encantados, amigos. Este no es el castillo de un brujo. Mira allí. No, en la cumbre. ¿Lo ves? Él. Sí, él es. Qué lleno de majestad, qué solemne. Se diría un guerrero.
Huele usted a hiena.
¿Qué dice?
Que huele usted a hiena, señora.
¿Cómo se atreve?
Déjame en paz, señora.
Víctima.
Saria in nomine Patrica Paragut. Patrica, agora, Valentia, e quando un uomo che
Welcome to the Projection Booth. I'm your host, Mike White. Join me once again is Mr. Rob St. Mary.
You know, I think lower classes are less sensitive to pain.
It's true. Also joining us is Mr. Miguel Llansó.
Hey, I'm here back to the Mediterranean area.
This week we are looking at Louis Buñuel's The Exterminating Angel. Released in 1962, the film stars unruly number of actors in an unusual situation. The situation really is the movie, so I'm going to give a spoiler warning before we go any further. If you don't want anything ruined, go ahead, turn off the podcast, and come back after you've seen the film. So, Rob, when was the first time you saw The Exterminating Angel, and what did you think?
I have to think that this may have been another one of those that I got deeper in after. I talk a lot about working at the bookstore, and I worked at the bookstore. I had a coworker named Mike who was very much into film. He's the one who got me into Jodorowsky and Herzog and all of this. So I remember at the time, it was always easier to get the later French films. Those were much easier to get in the States. Kind of the Mexican era films, there was a couple you could get. I remember I held off on Robinson Crusoe for a long time because I'm like, I don't know. But there was this, and I believe that if my memory serves, they were, again, we've talked about New Yorker. So New Yorker, I remember those box designs, and I think it was probably, I went to Thomas Video, this was before I worked there, and I remember getting it. And I think at the time, kind of like the first time I watched Discreet Charm, I was like, I don't know if I get it. I don't know if I like it, but I like some of the humor. Like I say, opening, no, I don't personally feel that lower classes are less sensitive to pain. That is actually one of the quotes from the movie.
Oh, I thought that's just how you felt about things and really needed to express it here in this podcast. Okay.
Yes.
Right, I'm glad you clarified. Yeah.
You know, I just want to make sure that people understand, you know, I'm not a class traitor. I'm as poor as y'all. When you're not used to a movie that is plot driven, basically American film is very plot centric. So to see a movie like this for the first time, or like I say, when I saw Discreet Charm, you can go back and listen to that episode. I was like, I don't understand what's going on. Like, why isn't this progressing? I mean, this does progress. Seriously, it does. But I think even more so than Discreet Charm. But it was just this feeling of I'm trying to get what's in here. I'm trying to understand certain aspects. And it's like, of course, on repeated viewings, much more really enjoy it. It's one of, you know, my favorites if I was going to do a tier of Buñuel films. But sadly, again, it's like, it's, you know, Criterion has it. You can watch it on streaming, or I used to have it on DVD and Blu-ray. I think they did a Blu-ray of it. But it's like all that Mexican era stuff. There's some of them that are still really hard to get in the States, even like Los Soldados, you know, which should be lauded as an important film. And for some reason, that thing is not available. So there must be some sort of rights issues with a lot of these, you know, Mexican era films, because I know that a lot of them he did for just a job. He was just working. So some of them don't have his quote unquote stamp on it in the way that this does and connects to other movies like we talked about before we started rolling. And we'll obviously get into that.
And Miguel, how about yourself? When was the first time you saw it and what did you think?
It was on TV in Spain. It was very, you know, there was these movies they were showing at night, the classics. And it was with my mother. After dinner, you had this Tuesdays that you watch films with your parents on TV. And this is a very important film, they told me, and we were watching. And of course, I didn't understand the plot, but it was very funny. It was very funny. And somehow, if you are from Spain, I think you understand it. I mean, in another way, because you laugh a lot. You understand the type of jokes, the type of how people get stuck. They are kind of very, very kind of classical Mediterranean jokes, no, that they are there. So even if the plot was not a thriller, you know, but to be honest, the first time, I think I was 15 or 14, and it was like, okay. And then it took me some time. And then I started to study film, and I started making my own films. And in the last 10 years, I really understand it again. You know, I watch it like 3 or 4 times in my life, I guess 4 times. And I really kind of feel it and understand it, you know, in a very deep way. It's not that you have to codify any symbol, so there is nothing behind the movie, you know, there is nothing secret. But I think I somehow connect with the humor, connect with what is portrayed there. You know, I know why he's doing that, and I kind of feel it, and I understand where is it coming from.
This was only maybe second, third watch. I remember definitely watching the film before when we talked about Discreet Charm of the Bourgeoisie, just because I had heard that the two films were so similar. So I definitely checked that out then, but I didn't remember it very well. So I was really glad to be able to go back to this. I find it very interesting that this is based on, I don't know if it was a play or another script, because at the very beginning, it talks about how it's based on a cinedrama from Luis Alcoriza and Louis Buñuel called The Castaways of Providence Street. And Rob, you brought up Robinson Crusoe, which is the ultimate castaway story, but I find it very interesting how the way this movie plays out reminds me of Hitchcock's Lifeboat. Just it's got the little group of people and all of their interactions, any sort of tensions that come out. I mean, with Lifeboat, you've got people from all these different strata. Here in this one, you have everybody except for Julio, the major domo. Everyone is in the same class, but they still find things to fight about and to bitch about. And just the way that they're stuck in here also reminded me a little bit of Malpertuis with the whole thing of all of the people that are stuck in this house and they can never leave. But that's a whole house. This is basically one room where they just cannot escape from. And it's such an interesting premise as far as the way that people's tensions rise, the way that they handle themselves in here. And then you add on top of it the way that it's being made, the whole repetition thing I find fascinating. It almost reminds me a little bit of Groundhog Day too, as far as how long have these people been here? We have no idea. Towards the end of the movie, I'm just like, okay, I've seen daytime and nighttime maybe 4 times, but it definitely feels like way more than 4 days. It feels like they've been stuck in this place for a month or more just because of they talk about the stink that they have. Of course, there's a dead body that they also are contending with, and just trying to even go to the bathroom. And the way that they talk about that, we'll definitely talk about the vases in the closet kind of thing. But yeah, fascinating film. And I was really glad to be able to come back to this one.
I think it's amazing. That I think we have to frame it more in, movies like the Marx Brothers, all these shortest movies that we have seen, even in the, American and Hollywood context, that makes no sense and escalate in a very exaggerated and surreal way. But it happens a lot in Spain that you say, look, I have to leave, no? I have to leave this party. I know. Do you want to stay? Yes, only 5 minutes. And next scene is like 6 a.m. Like that. You have to leave. Yeah, well, in 5 minutes I'm leaving, no? And then suddenly you realize that it's 9 a.m. and it's like, fuck, I had to leave at 11 p.m., and it's 9 a.m. And you don't know why, but you're still there, And so it's just a very common feeling, it's nothing strange or real in that sense.
I'm glad that Miguel brought up the absurd in the idea of Camus, but also I would say No Exit, Sartre. And the idea of being stuck in a place and you're like, oh, I'm here, but, what am I doing here? And obviously that can play into philosophical concepts of just human existence. Why are we here? What are we doing here? How do we get along together? The idea of creating these manners and what happens when the manners fall away. Or what do you do when you're under stress, which I think I've talked about this before when we've talked about zombie movies and why I love the Romero films, because it's not so much about the zombies, about putting people under a stressful situation and then seeing how they react versus who they think they are versus what they become. There's a lot of that in there. I brought a couple of books here in My Last Sigh, which is his autobiography, but as he notes in the front, our guest Jean-Claude Carrier wrote with a series of interviews he did. He said, Exterminating Angel was made in Mexico, though I regret I was unable to shoot it in Paris or London with European actors in adequate costumes. Despite the beauty of the house where it was shot, my effort to select actors who didn't look particularly Mexican, there were certain tawdriness in these aspects. We couldn't get any really fine tablecloth or table napkins, for example, and the only one that I show on camera was borrowed from a makeup artist. The screenplay, however, was entirely original. It was a story of a group of friends who have dinner together after seeing a play. When they go into the living room after dinner, they find that for some inexplicable reason they can't leave. In the early stages, the working title was The Castaways of Providence Street. But then I remembered a magnificent title that Jose Benjamin had mentioned when we talked in Madrid in the previous year about a play that he wanted to write. If I saw The Exterminating Angel on a marquee, I told him I would go in and see it on the spot. When I wrote him from Mexico asking him for news of the play, he replied that he hadn't written it yet, and that in any case, the title wasn't his. It came from a friend from the apocalypse, and therefore was in public domain. Apocalypse is in uppercase, so I don't know what that means. Doesn't seem like a title or anything.
Probably from like Book of Revelation. I mean, the original Exterminating Angel, from what I was able to discern, was from the Book of Samuel. So I made the sacrifice and listened to a audio recording of the entire Book of Samuel, which was actually very fascinating. I was not familiar with Samuel, who actually is in the line of David and all this stuff. So I was like, okay. So it was interesting. There's a lot of stuff that happens in that book.
There were many things in the film taken directly from life. I went to a large dinner party in New York where the hostess had decided to amuse the guests by staging various surprises. For example, a waiter was stretched out to take a nap on the carpet in the middle of dinner while he was carrying a tray of food. Of course, the guests don't find the antics quite as amusing. She also brought in a bear and 2 sheep, a scene in the film which has prompted several critics to symbolic excess, including that the bear is Bolshevism waiting to ambush capitalistic society, which had been paralyzed by its own contradictions. As in the film, I've always been fascinated by repetition, which is why certain things tend to repeat themselves over and over again. I have no idea. But the phenomenon intrigues me enormously. There were at least a dozen repetitions in Exterminating Angel. 2 men introduce themselves, shake hands, say delighted, and then they meet each other a moment later and repeat the routine as if they've never met each other before. And the third time, they greet each other with great enthusiasm, like old friends. Another repetition occurs when the guests enter the great hall and the host calls for the butler twice. And in fact, it's the exact same scene, but shot from a different angle. Louis, the chief cameraman, said to me as we were filming, "There's something very wrong here." "What?" I asked. "The scene where they enter the house, it's in here twice." Since he was the one who filmed both sequences, I still wonder how he could have possibly thought that it was such a colossal error that it escaped me and the editor. Exterminating Angel is one of the rare films that I've sat through more than once. Each time I regret its weakness, not to mention its very short time we had to work on it. Basically, I simply see it as a group of people who can't do what they wanted to do, leave a room. It's that kind of dilemma, the possibility of satisfying a simple desire, that often occurs in my movies. In L'Âge d'Or, for example, 2 people want to get together, but they can't. In that obscure object of desire, it's an aging man who can't satisfy his sexual desire. Similarly, Archibald de la Cruz tries in vain to commit suicide, while the characters of The Discreet Charm of the Bourgeoisie tried hard to eat dinner together, but never managed to.
This idea of repetition, this idea of the failure of will, is a very recurrent thing in Buñuel, no? The failure of will. Instead of, how is it called in English? The triumph, the Leni Riefenstahl.
Triumph of the will.
Triumph of the will. For us, it's the opposite, no? It's like the failure of will. And this is like happens every day, no? I see for instance, my father trying to push the whole family to the family car to go on vacation. Nothing moves. He has to call us 25 times, push it into the car. And his word, there is a word here that every family repeats, is what a cross or what a crucifix. And I think if you think about the end of Simon of the Desert, there is this disco party where Simon is with the wife. The wife is the evil. They finally get together and they are in this party. And Simon is really tired and really wants to go. They say to the wife, "Please, can we go?" And the wife says, "We'll stay here until the party's over." And I and my father are like, whoa, the failure of will. I really cannot, do what I want. I'm always in a family that doesn't allow me to do anything, in a society that is super Catholic, to have any agency. And I think that's why the Exterminating Angel represents, in all the movies, that kind of unbearable repetition of protocol and unbearable repetition of things that I cannot do, that I really had to do because because my mother-in-law is coming to visit me and I really cannot escape this terrible, like a family dinner. So really connect with that type of things, this big crucifix, imposed into your life every day.
The thing that's interesting to me is, Miguel, you have obviously the connection to your culture and, in that way with Buñuel, who shares the heritage with you. I look at it as the son of a Scottish immigrant, and you were talking about it from the Catholic angle. I look at it from Protestant angle. My grandmother was very proper. There were certain things you did not say in public. There were certain things you did not talk about. And it was about keeping up appearances. It was about maintaining manners. You know, one of the earliest memories I have, and this used to blow the mind of the workers at the fast food restaurants when I was in high school, was my grandmother sat me down when I don't know, 4 or 5 years old at the dinner table and said, okay, put a bowl of ice cream in front of me and say, okay, what do we say? Please, may I? Yes, you may. Thank you. You're welcome. And just run through manners until recently when I've started to kind of deconstruct some of this and allow for a little bit more flexibility in my life. I used to be like Hannibal Lecter when it came to manners. Like if somebody was very rude, you know, I would just, you know, I'd want to, you know, rip their face off, you know. Yeah, I just have this very visceral reaction to rudeness and to impropriety. And, you know, we just don't talk about those things. And so to me, I think this is probably what Buñuel's films, you know, if I were to get into my psychology and you know, why they resonate, is that he's breaking down those bits. He's looking at the cultures in which we live in and the manners in which we have and going, to what end? Like, what do these things do? Do they just cover up the, you know, the snarling, vicious animal that's underneath? Maybe if we were a bit more honest with ourselves and with each other, then maybe we wouldn't tear each other apart. You know, I think he leaves us with those questions, and I think that's what great art does.
Yes, totally. I think he was some sort of a comedian anarchist. So he felt all these constrictions, the social manners, as something imposed, but that we cannot escape, you know, and it is really like a burden. And he likes to laugh about it. If we think about, for instance, the beginning of the 20th century, when he was in Madrid, he was studying with Lorca and Dalí in the students' residency. They were the three of them together. And it was a very strict society, but they were in a very liberal institution. So they would go every night dressed as nuns just to joke. And in Andalusian doc, they use all these jokes. All these jokes are related to repressed desires, to do whatever they wanted to do, and to escape from that kind of very strong Catholic society, you know, that makes you, you know, repeat. You can really see the Andalusian doc is a collection of these jokes of how to escape from that very protocolized society, which is the Catholic society. I have the same grandma that you have, Rob. Same grandma, same repetition. I think I have a picture here. I will show you. So that's the connection, you know. Here it says.
See, but that's the connection. Catholics and Protestants, not so much different. There you go. See, exactly.
Talking about religion, I find it very interesting. Well, first off, I find it interesting that this whole thing's supposed to be a dinner party. We never actually see them eat dinner. We see the one servant come in with the tray and fall over, which is a big joke for everybody. Everybody's super happy, and it's all at the expense of this poor servant. Doesn't like jokes, so she goes into this little room and sees the bear there and these sheep that are under a table and is like, yeah, no sheep, no bear. We're not going to play our joke. And I'm like, well, what the hell joke was this that you were doing where you needed a bear and 3 sheep? You know, and then we come back to the room eventually, to the dining room, and nobody's there except for the one woman. And like I said at the beginning, I'm not going to try to give people names because it's just, I think it's ridiculous. And I think that it's very much on purpose ridiculous that we have so many characters in this movie, and they kind of seem to exchange with each other as well. But yeah, she picks up something and throws it through a window, and you cut to these two guys who are talking, and the one guy goes, must have been the Jews. And I'm like, what? Where did that come from?
Yeah, I thought about it as an inversion of like Kristallnacht, right? You know, so that was my, you know, it's like, oh, you do it from the opposite angle, you know.
It can be, yeah. Something you know, I think he was a joke collector, so that's probably a joke that comes in the last 10 years of his life, and say like, okay, I'm going to write it down, put it somewhere.
There was a great story that I heard Carrier talk about when he was working with Buñuel, where they would work all day, they would stop at a certain point, go off, have a drink, come back together, and then they had to tell each other a story, like something completely made up almost on the spot. And so that would kind of like just continue that cycle of imagination. Like to hear Buñuel talk about how he trained his imagination and the subconscious and was so into surrealism that he's like, no, I have to do these exercises because my imagination is a muscle and I need to have this muscle very well toned.
You know, he was very obsessed with muscles. He was a very athletic person and he needed that stamina. You know, he was a person obsessed with energy. He was himself saying, when I was a kid, I was an athlete. You know, when he was in Madrid, he was really trained. He was one of the leaders of the, you know, whatever football team. I don't know if it was football or no, I think it was running team. He was an athlete, basically. He was climbing the walls of the Residencia de Estudiantes, the students' residency. I mean, and he was really obsessed with that. So I guess he needed that constant confrontation, dialectic confrontation and joking to keep his, like, a little bit like, yeah, the third mind, in the words of, who said that? It was Alan Ginsberg, or it was William Burroughs, I think, is the third mind of Burroughs.
To get back to whatever plot we do have here, I just love the fact that all of the help appears to understand something.
They sense it. Like, somebody says, like, rats from a sinking ship, though I don't think that's very fair.
And I loved how, like, in My Last Side, which I read, he talked about, like, symbolic overreading. You know, he feels that critics or us, you know, who get into his movies overread. But I do have a feeling like when I look at the range of his work, that it always is those who are the most honest with themselves. This is where I think he shares with John Waters. You know, the heroes are those who are honest about their maladies or their filth or whatever, you know, they're in defeat or, you know, and they embrace it, then they're fine, you know. So to me, it's like the animals, the bear and the sheep, are the most pure because they're pure instinct, which is what I think the surrealists also wrote about in the 20s. But also that the workers would be closer down to that they would be more engaged with their own base instinct, and therefore they could be more honest than those who have to keep up appearances. So, of course, they would understand that, oh, well, there's something happening. We got to get the fuck out of here. You know, so whatever that thing is that's in the ether, they could possibly pick up on it better than those who are in the ruling class who have to keep on these appearances and keep up the play. You know, they have to keep up the play, even though they're not at the play anymore.
Films of Buñuel are kind of inherit from, you know, they're a next step on another variant of neorealist films, you know, where the humble class are more conscious about the nature of power, the nature of destiny, the nature of fate, you know. And I believe Mediterranean films are very much tragic in the sense that the characters, they are always managed by forces that they cannot control, you know, being God, the powers, political powers of the rich, you know. So I think the humble, they cannot control these powers and they are tragic. They just have to survive, you know, while the rich guys, they don't, because they are normally in control and they are normally in power. They don't understand that they have been doomed, that they are really in a situation they cannot control. And only when the film kind of evolves, they realize the real condition, the real life condition, which is like we cannot control fate. We cannot control anything. You know, there is a force, there is stronger than our, and this force is kind of disintegrating us, exterminating us, you know. And this is, I think, the true Exterminator Angel, you know, that even the richest people, they're going to die. They're going to be exterminated. They are going to be controlled by a bigger force, you know. And if you look at the Spanish literature, we were talking in our chat about the picaresque novels. The picaresque novel, this hero, the anti-hero, is a person that tries to survive in a situation he or she never has the control. You know, they just have to live. They are conscious that they don't have any power and they fight to survive. And the result is not so tragic as many other Mexican films. The result is kind of dramatic or very sad. But the result in the case of Buñuel is really tragicomic, you know, because the humble understands very well their own condition.
I find Julio to be a fascinating character because he's a servant, but he's above the other servants, you know, and he's the only one that sticks around. And he's the last one who can leave the room. When he leaves and goes to get coffee and comes back, he's the last one that has left that room to come back in. And then they really find out when they tell him, hey, go get some spoons. And he tries to leave the room, just can't do it. And then, of course, he starts to get into trouble. Like, hey, I told you to go get spoons. What the hell's going on? He's kind of the exception as far as the other people are now starting to have problems leaving the room, but yet he's the one that gets yelled at for that. I was also very surprised as far as that we leave the house at one point. I know it's a ways into this movie that we leave, but to have stuff outside of the house and the reactions from the rest of the town, the reactions from the rest of the servants, I really like that the servants all come back and they're just kind of out there like, oh, I wonder what's going on inside. Drinking, they've got their little flasks and stuff. And I'm like, oh, okay, this is kind of nice. But yeah, it's just so unusual as far as, we're talking about religion and things. And even to think about, I know this isn't a religious order, but the guys who recognize each other and kind of give each other the high sign, I guess they're both Masons is what I would think of. It's right around that same time that we pan over and there's this woman sitting there and she opens up her purse and she's got chicken feet inside, chicken feet and feathers and all this stuff. And then that will come back later on when they're trying to basically do magic and they start talking about the Kabbalah. It's like, whoa, I didn't see this coming.
Feels like a series of small jokes, not that, all this, in the sense that all these rich people are kind of stuck in some sort of an absurd world that is not the real world. And that's why the servants can come and go while the others are kind of trying to find out what the real world is. And that's why only through their suffering, only through the destruction of the world, I remember when they start drilling the wall, it's almost like a Buster Keaton scene, to get water because they don't even have water, no? And they start drilling the walls like a Buster Keaton style. It seems like everyone around is kind of giving them some sort of a lesson, or saying even the service is telling them like they have to discover by themselves what the real world is about. And the real world is that small games, they're small shit. This Kabbalah thing means nothing when you have to survive, no? And you are facing the real survival that you will never have to face as aristocrats, no? And this is, for me, very funny because we empathize with the servants, but we never empathize with the rich. We are glad they suffer, actually. We are a little bit like, yeah, it's good they suffer, And I don't think we are glad because a person suffers, but we are glad because somehow they realize about something. There is a very interesting painting in Tallinn that is called the Dance of Death. In the Dance of Death, every skeleton goes hand in hand with, it's a medieval painting, with a peasant, but they all also are taken to death. The nobles say like, no, I don't have to go because I have this nobility title and I don't have to die. And the skeletons say, yes, you also die. And all the rich, the poor, and the peasants, they accept it. They just go with the skeletons. They accept it. The rich, they can protest, saying like, I am exempt. I have this special paper saying that I don't have to go. They don't really accept the fate. This is funny because I think we take the position of the reality and we say like, yes, you have to pass through this. You have to learn from this. You also die. You are also weak. And this is something, that is funny, when we look at the bigger picture of the world and we see these big politicians and presidents that they believe they will never die, and they will never know the truth, that they are small somehow, and they are not almighty. And I think Buñuel is conscious that there is something, even if he's somehow anti-Catholic, but he's conscious there is something big on the top of everyone, and you cannot, you are not almighty, and you will have to go through this process. And that's why the film becomes so funny, in my opinion, because the rich get totally crushed and destroyed.
The thing that's interesting about him and his biography and his background is that he was part of that class. He was raised, relatively well off, even in a small town. I remember when we did the Discreet Charm episode, I think it's John Baxter who did the biography on him and talked about, kind of his background in that way. And that I think it's probably that tension within him where He was raised in that, probably around some of these types. So he, of course, is most apt to point at them and be, lacerating in his humor, because he can point it out easier than, I guess, if you weren't raised around it, you would just be like, man. But you can get into the fine-grained detail of how these people think, how they act in that way.
But you have to consider as well that he was a war refugee, and he suffered from this wealthy, because he went to study in Madrid. The mother was paying him the studies and everything. Everything was going quite well. He goes to Paris with Dali and, living the great life. And suddenly the Spanish Civil War comes. And he has to go to America. He goes to New York. He goes to Los Angeles because he has to find a very simple job, translating films. Actually, from the Golden Age until the next film, Great Casino, is 16 years past. Almost he doesn't direct anything, 16 years. He helps a little bit with La Surde and a little bit with a film that is shot in Madrid as a co-director, but he's 16 years without directing. And he goes to Los Angeles, a guy that comes from a wealthy family, and he has to work as a translator. And then he goes to ask the help of Dali, and Dali says, fuck you, because if I help you, friends don't help each other economically, because then you will depend on me, and it's better, we will be better friends if we don't help each other. While Dali was organizing these big parties in New York, with all the high class, and Buñuel was really, really suffering the same destruction that the people from the Exterminating Angel suffer in that room.
I think if the timeline I remember is he went to New York and ended up in LA, and he worked for MoMA, which this loops back to the Triumph of the Will, in that he edited a version of the Triumph of the Will for Museum of Modern Art. I don't know if that's ever been released in some way, if anyone could see it. I heard it was just, he just edited it down. He didn't do anything that was bizarre with it or anything like that. It was just, this thing is too long in these speeches, so he condensed it or something like that. But when he was working at MoMA, word got around that he was an atheist, and this led to a scandal, and he got fired. And then he had to go find something. And then in LA, as you were saying, he couldn't really make a living. So he was like, well, where am I going to go? He couldn't go back to Spain because he hated Franco, and, Lorca disappeared. And when you read My Last Sigh, Lorca was so close to him. This is the thing that always bugs me about Buñuel, that I love so much. I mean, I love him so much as a creative person, but I guess everybody has their foibles as a personality, is that he could never get himself to accept the fact that Lorca was queer. It was a bridge too far for him. But in terms of writer, in terms of poet, and, they were best friends, and he cared about him deeply. And when he was disappeared, it was just such a loss. And I think that part of why existentialism and the absurd becomes so important is that it was built off of World War I, but it went even further after World War II, where it was just like we lived through all of these shocks. Nothing matters. Everything is fucked, basically. So when you live through those horrible shocks, and he was born in 1900, you really see him as kind of the embodiment of what happens when you've gone through that much horror between World War I, the Spanish Civil War, and World War II. But he ends up in Mexico, and as you were saying, Miguel, it's like he has to be a journeyman. He has to be the equivalent in film of being an electrician or a plumber, where it's just I just work. I just have jobs. This isn't really so much about my own personal vision. His own personal vision sneaks in from time in some of those Mexican films. But he's not able to do what he did earlier or what he would later do in France, where, basically from Verdiana on, from 60 to mid 60s, really, I'd say, I don't know, maybe Diary of a Chambermaid forward to the end, his last 15 years or so of his career, where it was just he had producers and they gave him money and they say, here, just go do whatever you want. That's not what the Mexican period was. And I think that's why there's certain movies in there that stand out in that period. And like I say, I haven't seen all of them because they're hard to get your hands on.
he calls them survival films. Actually, they are not, but it's, I had to do commercial films, but we call it a survival films. But it's really amazing because this idea of I cannot do what I want to do in all the films, from El to, how is it called in English, Abismos de Pasión, it's called, which is based on that book. How is it called? And I don't remember. Abismos de Pasión, like a patient abyss or something. There is always this impossibility, But also, not only the impossibility or the failure of will, but also the people dragged by their own passions that they cannot control. It's not only the imposition, how power imposes, gets on the top of you, but you don't even can control yourself, which is even more interesting, because he was humble enough not to blame others and to say, like, I had all this period, from MoMA then to where everybody was like, destroying me. No, it was like, it's my own internal flame or my own fire that destroys me because I cannot even control my own feelings. And you can see that I think in 100% of his films, from everything, the obscure of Es oscuro objeto de deseo, to El discreto encanto de la burguesía, about the woman that gets, she's from the aristocracy and she likes to prostitute herself in order to find certain freedom in that warehouse, or burdel, And so there is always a flame inside and nobody can repress. And that is sometimes a crazy flame, the flame of craziness, because you cannot really, I think he himself couldn't control, like if somebody had a little bit more of brains or logic, he will stop. But he was sent to the US and then to Mexico and then tried to survive in Mexico. Then he goes to France, make one film in Spain that Franco allowed, which is Viridiana. I think it was shot in Spain, no? Viridiana. But as a filmmaker, I understand. Sometimes it's like, God, I mean, I'm totally nuts because, why I'm doing this? Where is this flame burning me? You suffer more than anything else. That's a very interesting thing, that he was not blaming. He's a guy, you read the memories, he never blames anyone. Actually, he was one of the best friends of the Franco favorite filmmaker, which was a friend of him that made this movie about Franco. Heredia is his name, and they were friends until the end of their life, And he knew he was kind of praising Franco and making all these films for Franco, but still was not blaming him.
Abismos de Pasión is Wuthering Heights.
Exactly. That is based on the novel of Emily Bronte. Yes.
One of the really nice things that we have in this movie is the whole idea of them being trapped in this room by something they don't know what it is. And it's not like there's a physical barrier. They don't explain it, which I really appreciate that they don't explain exactly what's going on. You mentioned the Romero films. We don't know exactly why the zombies happened in any of those movies. There's always the theories, when there's no more room in hell kind of thing, to go back to Miguel's painting that he was talking about with the skeletons. It's like, yeah, we don't know exactly what's going on. And so it could be magic. And the way that they get out of the situation feels very much like a magical situation as far as, oh, look, everybody's sitting in the same spots that they were when this initially happened, which isn't true. So now we can leave again. It just, they suddenly decide like, okay, everybody's in the same spots. Let's go. But they're trying like, witchcraft and all of these things to try to get out of the space, though it doesn't feel like they're trying very hard or very logically. We see them trying to get the water out of the pipes by breaking through the wall, like Miguel was saying. But they're not trying to break through the wall. They're not trying to get out that way. It's not like I ever see anybody try to open up a window and try to go out that way. There's no experimentation. They just kind of accept their fate, which I find to be fascinating. There was a movie from 2013 called The Last Days, Los Últimos Días, which was very interesting because it's kind of a post-apocalyptic type movie. It's kind of like, what was that? Bird bath, bird watch, bird whatever, where it's just like, okay, something happens in the world and everyone, you can't look at these creatures or else they'll attack you. Like some of those things, like a Bird Box. And so this is kind of a similar thing. It's like, all of a sudden people start to not be able to go outside. Like it starts off at this company and there's a guy who's firing all these people. And there's one guy who gets fired. He's just like, no, I can't leave. And they're like, what? They're like, this guy hasn't showered in days. He's been at the office. He sleeps here. What the hell's going on? And then they force him out of the building. Security takes him out. The guy dies. And it's like, there's no experimentation. At one point, they're like, oh yeah, this guy who was in a car, he died because he's still outside. So I'm like, okay, I don't know what the rules are. But after a while, I'm like, I don't care what the rules are. And same thing with this movie. I don't care what the rules are. They're stuck in a situation and this is all that they have. And they have to abide by these rules. It's like one of these puzzle movies where it's like, okay, now if we turn this thing to the left and then move over here, then something will happen. But with these guys, they're just like, we're stuck in this room. We have to put up with it. And they're stuck there. They don't really try to escape. It feels like they're ants in an ant colony.
I also find funny that the people who society deems can enforce the rules, which are the police, right, and the military, they're outside, but they won't do anything. They're just standing around. Like, they're not trying to open the door. They're not trying to figure out a way to get them out. They're hanging out. One of the things I find funny, it's like their kids come and it's like, here's some balloons for you. You know, it's like nobody's trying to do anything.
Yes, send the kid in.
But guys, it's not the world like that. It happens every day. You know, you don't get divorced or you don't get, against the fascists that they don't taking over the system. You don't even click like on Facebook, I don't know. Oh, okay. This is no, don't do it. Don't click like, you're going to get prosecuted. They put you in jail, you put a like there. Oh, Jesus Christ. No, I don't going to like. So it's really happening, Again, it's very Spanish kind of attitude. We say like in Spain, there is a guy doing some, road work. And there is like 75 people having their opinions if the guy is doing it well or not. Instead of helping there, it's like, no, but this guy is, no, do it more to the right. No, I mean, you're not doing it right. Put it this thing, but everybody's speaking and commenting like if we somehow were, and that happens with the people in the aristocrats there. They are somehow spectators of their own destiny, They cannot just stand up and leave the house because they could, they could just stand up or live. But sometimes we got trapped in our mental loops and we don't even say like, I have to stop smoking, or it's as simple as that, don't smoke, That's totally life, It happens like that.
Yeah, the cops are standing around like they've just been called to a school shooting or something. They just don't want to do anything.
Or it's a hostage situation. That's the way I remember the first time I saw it. It feels like a police procedural for a hostage movie. We're all standing outside and I'm like waiting for someone to pick up a bullhorn and say, okay, what do you want? And they're like, nobody's doing anything. They're just standing there. They're drinking. They're, waiting. The servants show up again. At one point, I find that funny. Like, it's like, we're come back to work. After whatever happened, I guess,
That's probably you deliver a screenplay in Hollywood that will be, the biggest hole. Why? What is the life, In life, we take a road and we don't turn right, How many times you go from home to the house and say like, hey, but have you walked left? And there is a shop there with a great Ethiopian food. No, man, I never entered that shop. Well, why? It's like, could I die or something? Oh, just go.
My ex and I were watching, I tried to show her Buñuel film. And she made fun of me mercilessly for my love of Buñuel film. And I remember that she said to me, there's enough ambiguity in life. I don't want it in my art and in my entertainment. I got to deal with enough ambiguous things. Like, this is not helping me. She's like, I want to watch Cold Case Files or the Homicide Life on the Street, marathon. I don't want to watch this.
Wow, how many times people watch Home Alone and they keep watching Home Alone, and there is this sense of security, that is so much needed in the population. And then it's, I think, very few percentage of the population that are open to adventures, to new stuff. And the movie is about that, Everybody, the police could come, the guys could jump through the window, but they will never do it, as we will never do it. We will keep watching Home Alone. And this is ABC, and this is what feels secure. Security sometimes is it's a concept that we take like the police or the army, but security is cornflakes in the morning. I don't have my favorite Crispies, and people, you can kill for that, really can kill for that. And you will put it in a movie and that's surreal. It's not surreal at all. It's happening every day, So I find Exterminating Angel is a documentary, Nothing strange is there, It's that we want to see things that are very safe. We want to feel that safety, like your girlfriend. But actually, life is like Exterminating Angel. I see it totally normal. I see like a normal movie, like a documentary movie.
I wanted to loop back, Mike, to see, because you had mentioned up the front things about L'Age and there's a couple of great images in here that have stuck with me over the years. And I kind of wanted to get into that. Like I said, a symbolic overreading, but still, Does the bear represent the rise of communism, Bolshevism?
Yeah, there are some really good images in here, especially it's very quick, but the bear at one point is seen by some other people and he stands up on his back legs. And I was just like, oh, wow, I didn't realize just how tall that bear is and how human he looks when he gets up on his hind legs. But yeah, he's interested because he just kind of hangs out. I kept thinking like, okay, that bear's going to eat those sheep. But no, that's the people that eat the sheep and the way that they bring them in and just get them ready for the slaughter. And the one guy who's like nuzzling up against the sheep that's tied to like a piano leg and he's being super nice to it. And I'm just like, that sheep only has a few hours to live because these people are going to slaughter this poor thing because they have no food. They finally have water. And I love the whole thing, too, with the bathroom where they go into the closet and there's all those vases, just beautiful Chinese, huge vases that are just stuck in a closet. But the story that the ladies tell about when they go in to use the bathroom and how one saw an eagle and the other one had wind rush up in her face and leaves and things. And I guess that was related to people, I guess, in Buñuel's town where they would have the bathroom over a cliff and just everything would drop out. So you could have these incredible vistas through the bottom of your toilet.
It's a small thing where she talks about what she sees at the bottom of the toilet, which ties me to another absurdist, where it was another guy that I referenced too much, Bob Downey in Putney Swope, where it's like, we're going to work on selling the advertising that can come out of our toilets. But also, like you were talking about the vase, so it's like, okay, you can read the symbolism where it's like, yeah, art is a very beautiful thing. We care about art until we don't. And then the whole thing with them breaking up.
Beautiful for me to poop on.
Or the cello thing, where they break up the cello and use it for firewood, which to me is a great image. And again, I want to say is that Discreet Charm, there's some sort of thing with like a cello or, at minimum, the use of classical music. Again, this comes up with the conductor who, they keep calling him maestro.
It's in the golden age that suddenly he's listening to that concert and he has a terrible headache and he had to go to the garden. He cannot get lost in this kind of bourgeois gardens with like a Versailles garden. And he start like, oh, and he goes and I think finally he start licking the feet of some woman or some statue or something like that because the guy cannot bear this cello or something. I think there is no zero symbolism there. I think there's surreal. It's kind of these forces. Same symbolism as Buster Keaton. Why do you laugh? There is nothing symbolic there. I mean, there is something deeper, which is kind of this spontaneity of life, these weird connections between the things that make you feel the freedom, freedom of something unseen, precisely the danger of something insecure, something that kind of burst like a storm, like a light bulb or something. And I think this is what get us, in that moment, that the guy had a terrible headache, like, oh, see, why is that, that bursting, like the bear you mentioned, like. There is no domestication. We trend, even when we write, to domesticate our ideas, to make them understandable, to go through logic. They try to kill that domestication, the pure idea as it comes. If it makes you laugh, it's powerful enough to be there as something so poetical that it doesn't have a reference, because we are so used to the Bible. There is a symbol and the meaning, but when there is something really poetical, there is no measure. We cannot pin it down. It's something that is happening and we are astonished and we are wondering what the hell, but we still feel it. We still laugh. We still say, this is wonderful. So it goes into our subconscious, no?
The use of sheep throughout his movies keep coming up. And I know that as a kid, they always used to say, oh, count sheep, to go to sleep. So the idea of dreams and things like that. But also you could go, oh, well, the sheep, the shepherd, Christ, all of that piece. But the one in here that I really liked, and I was like, Sam, did Sam see this? Is the hand crawling on the floor? I was like, that's thing from Addams Family. And then also, Evil Dead. So I was like, where they go after the hand that's crawling on the floor.
I'm really curious because I heard a story that Buñuel was involved with the Beast with Five Fingers. I cannot find anything to substantiate that, but it even came up during the audio commentary where there was comparisons of this with the Beast with Five Fingers, and that Buñuel didn't like the skittering of the hand as if it was walking on its fingertips, like Evil Dead 2, like Thing, those things. And he preferred the sliding hand, and that's what he's got in this one. And I like how the hand, for me, the hand is usually symbolic of a penis. We talk about the castration anxiety inside of the Star Wars films, but the hand is the conductor. I think it's the conductor, whoever it is that dies first, who's stuck in a closet, and the hand just plops out. And then the lady sees that and she kind of freaks out. And then I think it's another night, she imagines now the hand is free form, free roaming, and comes after her and goes up and starts to choke her. And then she goes to stab the hand, and she almost stabs the hand of one of her fellow guests. And it's like, okay, yeah, she's really starting to lose it. But that hand sequence, when it's sliding, I think it is actually scarier to have the hand slide than skitter.
Because like you were saying, like in Evil Dead 2, it's always, walking and then it gets stabbed, into the boards, It's always one of those images. Because like I say, he has hands in Shin Andalou, with the hand and the ants coming out,
Oh, and the disembodied hand there that he's poking with a stick. It's like on the sidewalk and the guy's poking at it.
Yes, with the traffic accident, no? And yeah. He had it inside the box, no? The biker, I think. He had the hand, I don't remember, but I think it goes with this bag biking, and inside there is the hand, no? Again, something, the uncontrollable hand, again, something that, even you cannot control your body, This is crazy.
And they can't. They literally can't control the situation they're in. I love that image that you're talking about with the rich people, because there's always the rich guy who thinks he can buy his way out of any situation. And here we have an entire room of rich people that think they can buy their way out of this. I'm surprised they're not like, okay, all right, how much to get out of this room, or worried about this stock market and I need a phone. I need to hear how United Affiliation is doing or whatever.
I think that's the biggest truth, yes. It's called memento in Latin, which is remember that you die. A little bit like the trumpets of apocalypse, that at the end nobody gets, nobody gets saved. It's like everybody goes. And it was in the medieval times a way of saying even these rich guys are fucking you, well, don't worry, they will go. And I think somehow mentality in Spain is very medieval, because the god is kind of the father. It's not this father which is very cruel, sometimes loves you, sometimes destroys you. And I think this is also the relation that people have in Spain with the state. We try to trick the state tries to trick us. There is always, you will ask for a grant for a film and you always have to trick. And you have there is this game of corruption and, at the same time, you hate the state or you hate the government, but somehow you love the government, all this fight. I think it comes from feudalism, this father that tells you, now One day it's slapping you, and the next day it's bringing you the food.
The thing that's really interesting to me also in watching this is that, I hadn't seen it in a while, maybe 10 years or more. And this thing is more batshit than I remember. Like, I thought it was a bit more subdued, to be honest. Compared to even some of the later French film, this one is a bit more punk rock, and energetic than I remember. So it seems like when he went back to France, things like Belle de Jour or Discreet Charm or even Phantom of Liberty is a bit more
French,
relaxed. It's not as hyper. There's definite anxiety in there, I guess, for lack of a better. It's like there really is a tension in here that in some of the other movies I don't feel as tensed as I did when I watched this one.
I think Mexico reality was quite more brutal than the French reality. Also, the Spanish reality, when you do the most punk films are the Golden Age and Andalusian Dog. He starts really punk, talking about passions, and then I think the consecration of the Mexican period is really punk. It's really strong. And it goes a little bit to France and, French, like, back in time, they were more intellectual. It's a little bit after the Nouvelle Vague. They are very strong films and very powerful films, but I found them more elite films or more intellectual films, Mexican period, that they were more commercial, but you can see this kind of more Latin passion there and more, not so domesticated. That's the French period, I believe. I think you are totally right. Yeah.
I guess they're not connected. Maybe they are in certain ways if we're talking about manners. But I was watching a YouTube essay about, of all things, Office Space. And it was talking about like the original ending of Office Space. The character, it feels like a loop. There's a character who they cut that would basically be similar to the previous boss that he had at the other place. So it's like you just can't win. You just loop yourself. And so to me, the ending of the movie where it's like, okay, they all get out, they go to the church, and now they can't get out of the church. It's happening again. And just that last shot of the sheep heading off towards the church, it's like, oh, we got a duty to do. We got to do our part.
Yeah, the whole thing of like, well, it was 3 sheep to feed this many people. Now you need this many sheep to feed all of the congregation. I guess that was the explanation that Juan Luis Buñuel provided, that he said his father had said. I'm so curious, though, as far as the end scene with what I only can assume is a police massacre that's going on. They're shooting a bunch of people, and I don't know what's happening with that. What do you guys make of that whole thing with the shots being fired and all the people running around? Because now suddenly the police are very active, but they're not helping again with any of the actual problems that are going on.
If I wanted to read symbolism, I could say, well, it's those who are wealthy and don't have to deal with police violence, state violence, which is usually metered out on the less fortunate, that they're locked away somewhere, and they're ineffectual. Like, they could be effectual. They could do something. They could help start the revolution, but they're not going to. You could read, again, this is the Bear and the Bolshevik piece, where you could read, class, communist, socialist class thing in there. But to me, not to say that there weren't violent, revolutions throughout Europe before this point, but this movie in that scene feels of a piece that maybe 68, that would be a commentary. It feels a few years early.
I agree with Rob. I don't think you can find the kind of a political commentary so early, probably, for police corruption or, it's probably it's hunting the bear. Some sort of, these things are not proper, no? What happened here is not proper. So some sort of coming back to the, most conservative forces, because that's what the police represents. Like, hey, we had to put some order here. We didn't do a shit, but let's hunt the bear. Let's, or maybe they couldn't. Maybe they didn't even recognize them. What is this? A bunch of punks getting out of there. So much deprivation. That it's it's somehow unbearable. No? I won't say it's a symbol. It's more like what I feel, but too much deprivation, too much uncontrol, too much anarchy there. Like it's not proper somehow.
Before they get out, I think it's one of the last scenes before they actually break through the barrier. There's an actual like going around to all of the different people and seeing a lot of their dreams, which, it's surrealist film, but we actually get to see some of their dreams. Some of them are just the one guy's face over the clouds and his face is spinning and the clouds are moving at the same time. And then I'm just like, oh, okay, this is nice that we finally get to see inside of them and what they're thinking about. And yeah, there's cloud. It's a lot of nature stuff. I wonder if it's just because they are not allowed right now to see nature. So they dream of, oh gosh, there's mountains. There's a whole thing with like some sawing that's going on over lightning and thunder. I mean, it's just some very strong dream imagery. And you even get, it almost feels like it's two people as if they were sharing the same dream.
Which isn't that unusual within Wells' film, with people waking up in the dreams of others. Whose reality are we in?
I'm not sure what I make of the whole thing with the cops at the end and just the way that they're shooting. I like the idea of them trying to hunt the bear because I don't know if we ever see what happens with that poor bear. I just feel bad for it because it feels like such a party favor type of thing. I'm like, who brought the bear? Did you have to go to a store? Like,
okay, who brought the dog?
How do you even get a bear and three sheep to show up at a party? And that feels like the beginning of a joke.
I just love the fact that in My Last Sigh, he said that somebody actually did that. So you based that on someone who brought a bear and sheep to a dinner party.
So strange. What a party that would have been.
He was kind of always surprising people with weird stuff, like unpredictable stuff there.
Well, it's like when he showed up on Dick Cavett and had his little aardvark that he threw out and was just like, oh, yeah, it's my pet. I'm like, okay.
Well, rich people do these extravagant things, as a way of feeling like the danger, because they know everything is under control, and they get really out of rail and control. But yeah, it's very common, this ideas rich people have, like, I don't know, you have seen Anora, but it's the first movie that came into my head like lately because of these extravaganzas that the rich people have, like, I don't know, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. For them, everything is a joke, because they can get out of it with no problem. So somebody brings a bear, it's like, oh, fantastic, why not? Exotic enough. And at the end, the poor animal is hunted by the police, the poor wild innocent animal, but they could start hunting the rich, but no, they probably hunt this poor animal. It's not clear, but...
Well, in the end of the movie, it's almost like a triumph when you have the bells ringing and all this. It's like, that's what you see in like It's a Wonderful Life or something that ends with like, oh, everything's great now. We've got the church bells going. And it's like, no, this is just starting another chapter. And it's like, what is this strange phenomenon? You mentioned the word simulacra, and that immediately throws my mind to Philip K. Dick. And I'm just like, yeah, I can see Philip K. Dick writing a story about this, just with like, this weird thing happened one day. I mean, it's almost a science fiction premise where it's like, these people were in this room and they couldn't leave the room. So now what? What's the situation? And that's the thing I like, is that Buñuel is like, okay, well, yeah, that's our premise. Now, where do we go with it? What's happening? And he doesn't talk about the barrier that much as far as the human relationships. And I think that's where it differs from like a science fiction story, is they would be like, okay, now we're going to get a robot or something to go through here. Like somebody, hires a chipmunk to try to go up to the house. Can it make it through the barrier? Like, okay, well, what's the rules here? And like, having a whiteboard where you have to write down like, well, we tried this. And like, no, they don't go through things logically. These people, once this happens, they're more concerned about themselves and more concerned about the relationships that are going on, more concerned about the carnality. I think there's a lot of fucking that happens in this movie. Not to be crude, but that's very true, right?
One thing that I sent over, because I wanted to talk a little bit, I mean, we've talked a little bit about influences, like cultural influences, like, when you live through those great shocks. But one of the things that I noted was, I saw this documentary last fall here in Albuquerque that was the Instituto Cervantes they do a Spanish film series, and it was called Benito Pérez Buñuel. And it talked about this writer who I didn't know, Spanish writer. and talked about him as an influence, especially in this early era. Like they use footage from L'Âge d'Or and then a lot of it from Exterminating Angel. Basically, the thesis of the director is basically that like once Buñuel went back to Europe and he kind of moved away from this direct influence of this writer. So I'm not familiar with this. Pardon my Spanish. Is it Galdós? Is that his name?
Benito Pérez Galdós, yes. The very amazing thing is that Benito Pérez Galdós was a quite realistic writer. You know, you read it in the high school. I don't read it from my high school time. So when you mention it, it was like, whoa, I didn't know. Now I'm going to go back to him. And yes, he has a very fine or a very detailed psychological landscape. I mean, he's able to portray psychological relations in a very deep way. And this is why I think Buñuel got all nuances of desire and reluctance and all this kind of human relations. You know? And then maybe that was passed through the drill of impulses and spontaneity and surrealism. And he got... But yeah, I should go back to Galdós. I don't know. He's a very famous writer here.
The documentary was quite good, hybrid in terms of what it does. And what the director tries to do is try to blend the two, which is where the title comes from. You know, the idea that they shared these commonalities. I found it really interesting. Like I said, I had no idea who this writer was. I only went because, you know, it's related to Buñuel and was down the street from where I lived. So I thought, you know, this is worth checking out. So I would include that, like if you put the trailer up and link to that, Mike, in the show notes, give people an opportunity to check that out. Hopefully it gets a bit of a broader release. I don't know if it's available anywhere else, but I know it's a Spanish director who created it. So, and it's been out, I think, maybe about 2 years. So I think it was like 2002 or 2003 that it came out. The one thing that was interesting and that I remember in there was it wasn't that Buñuel met him. I guess there was an opportunity for him to meet him, but he didn't go. But Lorca did. And then Lorca told him, there's this story that I guess like Lorca shares with Buñuel. And they had been reading his work. Like he said, maybe it was part of what they were doing in, you know, when they were in the Residencia school or something. Because I think it was around that period.
Yes, I read they met once, but I'm not sure. He made 2 films from his novels. One is Tristana and the other is, I don't remember the second one. And I think they met briefly.
The other thing I wanted to point to, I wanted to thank our old friend of the show, El Goro from Talk Without Rhythm podcast, because many years ago, I don't know how many years ago, I've been carting this thing around, but he sent me this book. He found this Buñuel book. This is from 1979. It was written by Higginbotham from the University of Texas in the late 70s. And so El Goro, who had been on the show many times, he found this in, I think, like a dollar bin somewhere and was like, you want this book on Buñuel? And I was like, sure. So he sent it to me, and there's, like I read from my last side, there's just a short piece at the end. I wanted to share this. It says, filmmaker is moralist. It says, the division of Buñuel's masterworks into 2 groups, character studies and social satires, is arbitrary, but can illustrate some important features of his art. It reveals that Buñuel evolves from preoccupation in the 60s with a series of characters, Verdiama, Simon, Beldejour, to a wider satiric view in the 70s, in which he made only one character study, Tristiana. Since then, Buñuel has concentrated upon the bourgeoisie as a social class rather than representing it as an individual. Even in his last film, which stresses upon the individual, is diffused through 2 actresses in portraying the same role, which is obscure object of desire. Thus, Buñuel can be seen as developing away from the creation of characters in a larger canvas of a social panorama. It says, evaluating Buñuel's art will depend to a large extent on which of his films will best endure the passage of time and changes in cinema. Assessment is complicated by reviewers and critics who have for years proclaimed that his latest film, whatever it may be, is his best. So far, critical esteem appears to favor the films which focus upon a central character. Buñuel's dissects society best when it looms as a matrix from which springs a personification of the bizarre behavior tolerated or demanded by its codes. The later satires, however, while depriving the viewer of the pleasure of identifying with a central character, continue to amaze by their technical brilliance and the ease in which Buñuel controls his craft. The originality of Buñuel's contribution has been to translate one of the richest artistic languages of his or of any time, surrealism, into a film language, and thus make a film a compelling moral force. The era of discovery in which filmmakers were enthralled with the technical capacity of cinema, Buñuel never lost sight of this conception of film as a social instrument as well as a visual toy. He owes his determination to disturb and provoke rather than to merely display to surrealism. Sustaining his early achievement over 50 years by making it more accessible to the wider public, Buñuel constantly updates his vision of a society paralyzed by worn-out formulae. Like a kaleidoscope, his art renders his few basic themes in infinite variations. His visual probe into the obsessions of the humankind and the social consequences is as thorough as an inquiry into society today. And it can be that for the first time, one of the great moralists of our century happens to be a filmmaker. The thing that's interesting about this book is that it was, like I said, published in 1979. And of course, he is listed as one of the great film surrealists. But I think that if you want to talk about someone who took film surrealism and surrealism visual further into the mainstream, it would be interesting to take him up against Lynch and see how an American surrealist evolves in that way.
I think both, they were tackling very well the society they grow up in, and I find that Lynch an amazing way of describing American society with these two sides, the darkness and the surface. And I think in Buñuel, there is also this surface and darkness, which is the Catholic environment he grew, where we were talking about this very strong forces coming from the subconscious to try to dismember and destroy what is always a very conservative environment. And if you see them, the two of them together, they don't have anything to do. They're totally different in the way they render the images, but somehow they drink from the same source, I say. It will be for another program.
But it was just something that I thought about because, this writer, obviously writing in the late 70s, Buñuel was still alive. He didn't die until 83. And that he represents kind of the apex at that time of what film surrealism was, or the use of that type of imagery. The only other person that comes close to me, in my mind, outside of Lynch, like I said, his films have been so scattered and so small over the years, has been Jodorowsky. Certain ties I feel between them as well in terms of dealing with some of these issues.
I never put Jodorowsky and Buñuel together. For me, they are not part of the same landscape for some reason. These seem to play a similar game, but actually they don't, because also Mexicans, and we were going to talk about Corquidi, and I think it's a total different landscape because I don't think Jodorowsky is a tragicomedist. He's much more critical. It's much more dry. Buñuel is very funny. His films are really anchored in a Mediterranean culture of tragicomedy, of, the survival person. And I don't think this connects at all with Jodorowsky. Even if they are sharing the Catholic tradition, I don't find any similarity way they understand art, for instance. I don't know.
9 out of 10, I would pick a Buñuel film over Jodorowsky film, but I do have a soft spot for Holy Mountain.
It was really interesting. I enjoyed it a lot. It was amazing. The reference that Rob was bringing, totally new to me, and very super interesting perspective of looking at, and also Mike, where you were conducting. It was great. I think I'm a bit empty now. We really it was very beautiful because I think we really went to the essence of what brings emotionally and from a wider perspective, a cultural and philosophical perspective. So I think it's a really beautiful program.
All right, we're going to take a break and play a preview for next week's show right after these brief messages.
O senhor prometeu isso a
Santa Bárbara.
A Llansó.
Só eu e ele sabia do milagre.
igreja você não entrará com esta cruz.
A igreja não é sua, é de Deus.
Mas eu não posso deixar ele entrar. Você sabe que eu não posso. Amanhã essa aqui não seria mais uma casa de Deus, mas a casa de todos os falsos ídolos pagãos.
Ainda não comi hoje, não vou comer até que abra a porta. Um dia, 2, um mês. Vou morrer de fome na porta da sua igreja.
Me arranja um quarto, do lado do mar.
Você acredita demais nas coisas.
Imagine a sua volta à cidade, em carro aberto, banda de músicas, foguete.
Não é bem Yansan, não. É outro orixá. Outra santa.
Ah, o flagra do Gomes.
Mas flagra de quê?
Ele não está fazendo nada.
Como não? Agitação social. Já vi que estou cercado de amigos. Amigo por todo lado. Cada qual querendo ajudar mais do que o outro. O senhor é um revoltado. Era não, estou ficando. Vou botar esta cruz dentro da igreja. Custe o que custar. Fecha a porta!
That's right. We'll be back next week with a look at O Pagador de Promesas. Until then, I want to thank my co-hosts, Rob and Miguel. So, Rob, what's been keeping you busy lately, sir?
I'm just enjoying my time up in the high desert. I think the last time I talked, I finished this novel. I'm outlining a few other things, trying to edit that one. I don't know. Maybe I'll put it out. Maybe I won't. Who knows? Just writing. And it's always good to be on the show. I think I've been on the show more this year than I have in quite a while. So, thanks, Mike.
And Miguel, I don't think we've really chatted since the release of Infinite Summer. How is everything going for you?
Going well. I really want to go to the next step. I'm a bit tired of the film, but I'm reading a lot about Mickey Mouse and about Disney and about the last days of Walt Disney, which is very interesting with Epcot and all these corporate utopias. And we were talking about simulacra before. This is a very big simulacra. And I'm reading a lot about Walt Disney.
Well, thank you again, guys, for being on the show. Thanks to everybody for listening. If you want to hear more of me shooting off my mouth, check out some of the other shows that I work on. They're all available at weirdingwaymedia.com. Thanks especially to our Patreon community. If you want to join the community, visit patreon.com/projection booth. Every donation we get helps the projection booth take over the world.
Here it comes again, taste of jagged glass and rusty can. There are just black holes where the stars would be watching. Just black holes where the stars should have been. Pools of dirt caress the urine-colored sun. Swarms of angels come to kill your sons. And there's nothing but black holes where the stars should have been. Nothing but black holes where the stars would be watching. All those strange organoids digging again in your pit. Cover them in menstrual stream. Cover them in black gold. Plunge them onto ingots, ripping through your menstrual stream. Rising up, taste of rustic can and jagged glass feeling again. Here it comes again. Hordes of locusts, blood out your sun, raining down. jagged glass and rusty can. There are just black holes where the stars should have been. Just black holes.